Hello, everybody. Happy Labor Day weekend. I'm going to give you a brief screencast here to talk about Juan Rulfo's story, We're Very Poor. I think it's technically better and just say more executed or better executed than Macario. Macario has a good story, but I think the themes are, just say, too direct sometimes. We're Very Poor, you have to put them together as a reader, and that's why I want to focus on that one. So I've read some of the discussions, and I think you guys are right on about Tasha and her ownership of her own body. But I want you to see how that builds with the language that Rulfo creates, because again, it's not so direct, it's a little bit veiled, and you have to look at the metaphors that he creates. So what we're going to do is just look at the first page here, okay? And let's see, I'm going to make the screen a little bit bigger. We can look at the text here. All right. So what happens at the beginning is that there's a death, right? Everything's going from bad to worse, and Jacinta had died. And on Saturday, when we'd already buried her and we started getting over the sadness, it began raining like never before. That made my father mad because the whole rye harvest was out, stacked in the open, drying in the sun. So we have now a couple of different deaths, right? We have the death of the ant and then this harvest, which needs to be dried in order to be viable, is going to be rained on and then poured on. And of course, the harvest is a sign of fertility. And so there's kind of a double death here. And we're actually going to get a triple death in many ways, right? Now, Rulfo is doing something that writers do quite frequently, and that is to use the external environment, the climate, the weather, to be a harbinger or to foreshadow something that's going to happen in the story, right? And this rain is going to be relentless. And what you're going to see is that he'll use a metaphor for the moisture, the overabundance of moisture, and even what you would call the mugre, if you speak Spanish, the filth that comes from the moisture. And he's going to tie it to the menstruation of Tacha because she's 12 years old and she's just started now to become a woman. So there's all kinds of things in here that are cultural, about shame, about ownership of the body. She's becoming a woman here, but she has no agency and no say over things. In fact, we're very poor. I saw one discussion that was right on when you say we, right? If we identify Tacha with her worth with a cow, for instance, that's not a very positive sign. Now, backing up a little bit here, we might say that this calf, this young cow, is representative of Tacha, that she's a piece of livestock, a beast of burden, only there for fertility's sake, I guess you could say, for what she can bring to the family. And we also have to look at how she relates to her two sisters who became bad women, right? And it seems that this is becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy for them. Let's look a little bit more at the language that Rulfo uses here. This is a communal process almost of people watching this flood. And again, people watching Tacha become a woman, right? And here, when I went out to take a look, the river had already gone over its banks. It was slowly rising along the main street and was rushing into the house of that woman called La Tambora, the drum, right? Okay. You could hear the gurgling of the water when it entered her yard and when it poured out of the door in big streams. Okay. Now, here we know that the narrator, who is not Tacha, she doesn't have voice here. This is her brother, likely. My sister and I went back in the afternoon to look at that mountain of water that kept getting thicker and darker and was way above where it should be. So the fertility here, the blossoming of this young woman, she's in full spring, right? We're going to move over to the next page, page 27, and we'll also see how the names, just like in Carver, can mean something. The name of the calf is La Serpentina, the serpent. And of course, in Catholicism, the serpent is not only representative of trickery of the devil, but of male masculinity as well. So it combines a couple of metaphors here, right? The snake, if you will. We don't know why it got it in her head to cross the river when she knew it wasn't the same river she was used to every day. A Serpentina was never so flighty. What probably happened is she must have been asleep to let herself get drowned like that. Lots of times I had to wake up when I opened the corral gate for her, because if I hadn't, she would have stayed there all day long with her eyes shut, real quiet and sighing, like you hear cows sighing when they're asleep. So Tacha doesn't even seem to be aware of what everybody else is aware of, right? She seems to be an object. She's objectified here and just not even having awakened to the changes in her body. I asked a man who saw the river wash her away if he hadn't seen that calf that was with her, but the man said he didn't know whether he'd seen it. He only spotted it. He said that a spotted cow passed by with her legs in the air very near. You can't get much stronger than that in terms of the sexual imagery, right? Tatcha here is being viewed as no more than an object once again. All right, I'm going to skip over to page 28. Okay. And again, here's this kind of communal property of the feminine body within the culture. What we're upset about in my house is what may happen any day now that my sister Tatcha is left without anything. My father went to a lot of trouble to get a hold of La Serpentina when she was a heifer to give it to my sister, so she would have a little capital and not become a bad woman like my two sisters did. And that suggests that young women are dependent on things from men, from family, to have their identity, which in this case I think Rulfo is obviously being very ironic about. Okay, we have the text about the two sisters who kept going down to the river for water sometimes, and then they'd be out in there around in the yard, rolling around on the ground all naked, each with a man on top. Okay, and I would ask you, at what point in the story do you see these women get to have their own voice and define themselves? That's why my father is so upset now about Tatcha, because he doesn't want her to go the way of her two sisters. He realized how poor she is with the loss of her cow, seeing that she has nothing left to count on while she's growing up is to marry a good man who will always love her. What about her own choices, right? That's going to be hard now. When she had the cow, it was a different story, for somebody would have the courage to marry her just to get that fine cow, right? To see her as a piece of property. All right, just kind of getting on to the last page here. I'll just read a paragraph and talk about it briefly. My mother can't understand why God has punished her. So, giving her daughters like that, when in her family, from grandma on down, there have never been bad people. They were all raised with fear of God and were obedient and never were disrespectful to anybody. That's the way they all were. Who knows where those two daughters of her got that bad example? She can't remember. She goes over and over all her memories, and she can't clearly see where she went wrong or why she had one daughter after another with the same bad ways. She can't remember any such example, and every time she thinks about them, she cries and says, "May God look after the two of them." But again, this is the mother's voice, and it's really the first time we hear it, and we only hear it very briefly, okay? And then it's circumvented by the father's voice right after. He's got the power. But my father says there's nothing to be done about them now. The one in danger is the one still at home, Tatcha, who's shooting up like a rod and whose breasts are beginning to fill out, promising to be like her sisters, high and pointed, the kind that bounce around and attract attention. Yes, he says, they'll catch the eye of anyone who sees them, and she'll end up going bad. Mark my words, she'll end up bad. That's why my father is so upset. So the question becomes, here, are young people trusted? Are young women trusted? I mean, what is Rulfo after here? He builds this metaphor pretty heavily. We're going to look at, if you go back and look at the rain and the way that it affects the environment and how it's viewed and whose voices get to speak and whose voices don't get to speak, you're going to see an indictment of his own culture. And this was done a long time ago in the 50s, right? So I think it's a very powerful short story, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.